She didn't realize that this brief encounter would lead to changes she could never have anticipated. As she drifted off to sleep, her hand still entwined with Carter's, the wheels of fate were already in motion, setting the stage for what was to come. The following morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the tumultuous events of the previous day. Sarah woke early, as was her habit, and went about her morning routine with a sense of purpose. While helping Carter with his medication and morning care, her mind kept drifting back to Isaac and his unexpected act of kindness. "I think I'll go back to the store today, Carter," she said while tidying up the living room. "I want to thank that young man properly, maybe bring him some of those oatmeal cookies you used to love so much." Mr. Carter's eyes crinkled at the corners, his version of a smile. Sarah patted his hand gently before heading to the kitchen to bake. An hour later, with a small container of freshly baked cookies in hand, Sarah made her way back to Simmons' grocery. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and she found herself scanning the checkout lanes for Isaac's familiar face. However, Isaac wasn't there. Frowning slightly, Sarah approached another employee, a young woman arranging a display near the front of the store. "Excuse me," she said politely. "I'm looking for Isaac, the young man who was working the checkout yesterday." The employee looked up, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. "Oh, Mrs. Sarah," she said, her voice tinged with surprise. "I'm not sure where Isaac is. He didn't show up for his shift today." A knot of unease formed in Sarah's stomach. "He didn't show up?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. The employee shook her head, looking uncomfortable. "No, ma'am. It's not like him to miss work without calling. I don't know any more than that. I'm sorry, I can't be of more help." Sarah thanked the employee absently, her mind whirling with possibilities. Had Isaac gotten into trouble because of her? Had standing up to the officer cost him his job? The guilt she felt yesterday rushed back, intensified by worry as she left the store, the container of cookies still clutched in her hands. As she walked home, a deep sense of unease settled over her. Isaac's absence felt strange, especially after what had happened the day before. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. With slower, heavier steps than usual, Sarah scanned the streets, half hoping to catch a glimpse of Isaac. But the familiar faces she saw were not the ones she was looking for. When she arrived home, she sank into her chair next to Carter's bed with a heavy sigh. "Carter," she said softly, "Isaac didn't come to work today. No one knows where he is." Mr. Carter's brow furrowed slightly, concern evident in his eyes. Sarah reached out to take his hand, drawing comfort from the familiar touch. "I can't help but worry," she continued. "What if he lost his job because of me? What if—" She trailed off, unable to voice the myriad of concerns swirling in her mind. As the day wore on, Sarah found herself growing more restless. She tried to focus on her usual tasks, preparing meals, tending to Carter's needs, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Isaac. The morning's worry and guilt clouded her mind, and she felt an overwhelming urge to find him. After lunch, Sarah decided to head back to the store, convinced that she needed to learn more about Isaac's disappearance. Maybe someone would have more information or at least some insight into what might have happened. She felt determined to uncover the truth, not just for her peace of mind, but for the young man who had shown her such kindness. Unable to shake her concern for Isaac, Sarah went about her usual tasks, caring for Carter, preparing meals, and tidying the house. But her thoughts constantly returned to the young man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. That night, as she lay in bed with sleep eluding her, Sarah made a decision. She would return to the store tomorrow and the day after, if necessary. She was determined to find out what had happened to Isaac. It was the least she could do for someone who had risked so much to defend her dignity. Little did Sarah know that her path and Isaac's were about to intersect again in a way that would change both their lives forever. Several days passed, each marked by Sarah's increasingly worried visits to the grocery store. Each time, she received the same response. Isaac hadn't returned to work, and no one seemed to know where he was. When she finally managed to speak with the manager, he was evasive, muttering about personnel matters and company policy. It was on a particularly warm afternoon, nearly a week after the incident, that fate intervened. Sarah decided to take a different route home, her feet leading her through the modest shopping district of their small town. The streets were busier than usual, filled with people enjoying the pleasant weather. As she walked, lost in thought, a figure on the sidewalk ahead caught her eye. A man was sitting with his back against a building, a small cardboard sign propped up in front of him. There was something familiar about the slump of his shoulders and the tilt of his head. Sarah's steps slowed as she approached, her heart beginning to race as recognition dawned. The man wore a weathered jacket, his clothes rumpled and dirty, but there was no mistaking his face. "It's you," she breathed, coming to a stop in front of him. "Isaac?" The young man looked up, his eyes hollow but widening in recognition. "Mrs. Sarah," he said, his voice hoarse. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the busy street fading into the background. Then, almost in unison, they both began to speak. "What are you doing here?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with concern. At the same time, Isaac said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't want you to see me like this." There was a beat of silence, and then Sarah carefully lowered herself to sit on the curb next to him, her joints protesting, but her determination overriding her discomfort. "What happened?" she asked gently, her eyes taking in Isaac's disheveled appearance and the dark circles under his eyes. Isaac sighed, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "I got fired," he said simply. "After what happened, the manager said there were complaints from some customers about what I said. He said it was bad for business." Sarah felt as if she had been struck. Fired for standing up for me? The guilt that had been simmering inside her for days bubbled to the surface. "Oh, Isaac, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault." Isaac shook his head firmly. "No, Mrs. Sarah, it's not your fault at all. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. What that officer did wasn't right. Someone had to say something." Sarah felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "But your job, your life." Isaac's laugh was hollow. "Truth is, losing that job was just the final straw. I've been struggling for a while now." As they sat there on the sidewalk, oblivious to the curious glances of passers-by, Isaac began to share his story. Sarah listened, her heart breaking for this young man who had shown her such kindness. Isaac's story unfolded slowly, each word seeming to cost him effort, as if he were unaccustomed to sharing his burdens. Sarah listened intently, her weathered hand resting on his as he spoke.